January 1889, Buckingham, England. On a desolate crossroad outside the market town, where four ancient paths meet beneath a weather-beaten signpost, locals whispered of something that defied explanation. A phantom that had begun appearing in the bitter winter nights. A headless woman in flowing black robes, standing motionless in the road, blocking the path of any traveler unfortunate enough to encounter her. The first sighting came from Thomas Hartwell, a well-known local farmer who had been driving his horse and trap home from the weekly market. The night was well advanced and dark, the kind of bone-chilling January evening when sensible folks stayed by their firesides. But Thomas had business to attend to, and he knew these roads like the back of his weathered hand. As his cart approached the crossroads, Thomas saw what he first took to be a wayward traveler, a black figure standing near the old wooden signpost that marked the junction of four ancient paths. He called out, offering assistance, as any decent man would do. But there was no answer. The figure remained motionless, blocking his way forward. As Thomas drew closer, his blood turned to ice. Where the figure's head should have been, there was nothing, only empty air above shoulders, draped in flowing black fabric. His horse began to tremble like a leaf, backing away from the apparition with such violence that Thomas feared his cart would overturn. The Illustrated Police News, Britain's most sensational tabloid, seized upon the story with typical Victorian fascination for the macabre. Their report, published in January 1898, described how the phantom appeared to be waiting, but for what or whom, no one could say. Thomas was not the only witness. Within weeks, other travelers began reporting encounters with the Headless Woman. A young couple returning from a dance in a neighboring village described how their horses refused to cross the junction, rearing and pawing until they were forced to take a longer route home through the muddy back lanes. The local constabulary initially dismissed the reports as the product of too much ale and winter superstition. But as the sightings multiplied, even the most skeptical began to take notice. The phantom appeared to follow a pattern, always on the darkest nights, always at the same crossroads, always blocking the path of those who dared to travel after midnight. Victorian society was obsessed with the supernatural, and the story of Buckingham's Headless Woman spread like wildfire through the popular press. Spiritualists claimed she was the restless spirit of someone who had met a violent end. Local historians pointed to ancient records of hangings and murders at Crossroads, where criminals were traditionally buried to prevent their spirits from finding their way home. But the truth, as revealed by careful investigation, was far more tragic than any ghost story. The crossroads where the phantom appeared had been the site of a horrific accident just months before the first sighting. Margaret Whitlock, a young woman from a nearby village, had been decapitated in a coaching accident when her carriage overturned during a fierce storm. Margaret had been traveling alone to visit her dying mother, carrying with her the family's meager life savings. The money was never recovered from the wreckage, and local rumors suggested she had been murdered for it rather than killed accidentally. Her body was buried in the local churchyard, but her head was never found. The phantom's appearance seemed to correlate with reports of treasure hunters and grave robbers in the area. Some believed Margaret's spirit was guarding something, either her missing head or the lost money that had disappeared with her. Others claimed she was trying to communicate the truth about her death, pointing toward her killer. Dr. Edmund Blackwood, a London physician and amateur investigator of supernatural phenomena, traveled to Buckingham to study the case. His detailed report, published in the British Medical Journal, suggested that mass hysteria and suggestion could account for the multiple sightings. But even Blackwood admitted he could not explain how multiple witnesses described identical details of the apparition's appearance. The sightings continued throughout 1889, becoming so frequent that many locals avoided the crossroads entirely after dark. The local inn reported a sharp decline in evening trade, as travelers refused to risk an encounter with the Headless Woman. Even the mail coach altered its route to avoid the haunted junction. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the sightings stopped. In March 1899, workers repairing the old signpost discovered human remains buried beneath it, a skull and several bones wrapped in rotting fabric. Local authorities confirmed that the skull belonged to a young woman, almost certainly Margaret Whitlock. After Margaret's remains were properly buried beside her body in the churchyard, the phantom appearances ceased entirely. The Crossroads returned to their former quiet, and late-night travelers once again felt safe using the junction. But the story of the Headless Woman had already entered local folklore, where it remains to this day. The case fascinated Victorian society because it seemed to bridge the gap between rational explanation and supernatural mystery. Here was a ghost story with witnesses, evidence, and even a resolution, yet it still left questions unanswered about the nature of consciousness after death. Modern investigators have suggested that the sightings were elaborate hoaxes designed to keep people away from the Crossroads while treasure hunters searched for Margaret's missing money. The theory holds that someone who knew about the hidden gold orchestrated the phantom appearances to prevent interference with their nighttime excavations. But this explanation fails to account for the genuine terror displayed by horses and other animals when approaching the Crossroads. Victorian newspapers documented numerous cases of livestock refusing to pass the junction, even during daylight hours when no human apparition was visible. The Headless Woman of Buckingham represents one of the most well-documented ghost cases of the Victorian era, recorded not just in sensational tabloids but in police reports, medical journals, and local government records. Whether supernatural visitation or elaborate fraud, it captured the imagination of an entire generation. Today, the Crossroads outside Buckingham appear unremarkable, just another rural junction where four country lanes meet beneath a modern road sign. But on the darkest winter nights, when the wind howls across the fields and shadows dance in the moonlight, some locals still claim they see her there, waiting, watching, blocking the path for reasons known only to the dead. The Woman Without a Head reminds us that the Victorians lived in a world where the boundary between the natural and supernatural seemed far more porous than our own. In an age before electric lighting banished the darkness, when death was a daily companion and mystery lurked around every corner, ghost stories weren't just entertainment. They were attempts to make sense of an incomprehensible world. Whether Margaret Whitlock truly returned from the grave to guard her secrets, or whether her story became a canvas for Victorian fears and fantasies, the Headless Woman of Buckingham stands as a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with the unknown, and our desperate need to believe that death is not the end of all stories. Subscribe to the Midnight Whispers for true horror from forgotten files. One unforgettable story, one haunted night. Dare to join us?